The fall of Rome. It's this epic story, right? One of the biggest, most famous events in all of history, and we all kind of feel like we know how it went down. But what if that big, dramatic collapse we all picture in our heads is, well, more of a myth than reality? Let's dig in.
Okay, so when I say the fall of Rome, seriously, what's the first thing that pops into your head? For most of us, it's a super specific, really dramatic scene.
Yeah, I'm guessing you're picturing huge armies of so-called barbarians just storming the gates, completely overwhelming the Roman legions in one single catastrophic invasion. This fiery, epic end to a civilization that lasted 1,000 years. And look, it's a powerful story. It's super imaginative, and it's been told this way for centuries. But here's the catch. It might not be the whole story, not by a long shot. So, was it really that simple? Did this incredibly sophisticated empire just get wiped off the map by a wave of invaders? Well, when you look at the actual historical evidence, it paints a totally different picture, and honestly, a much more interesting one. All right, so let's shift gears. Let's move away from the myth and dive into what the sources actually tell us. Because the fall of Rome, it wasn't some sudden overnight thing. It was more like a slow, painful unraveling that took over a century. And check out the wording here. The key words are infiltrating and destroying it from within. See? This isn't about a big head-on attack. It's hinting that the final collapse only happened because the empire's internal structure was already rotting away. And get this is the real mindbender. A lot of these so-called invaders, they didn't actually want to burn Rome to the ground. Nope. A lot of the time, their goal was to get legal status, maybe some fancy Roman titles, and a piece of land inside the empire. They wanted in on the action, not to destroy the whole thing. Okay, so if it wasn't just a big invasion, what really happened? What made the Western Roman Empire finally crumble? Well, the answer is that there were some really deep cracks forming in its foundations for a long, long time. Problem number one, the empire was totally unbalanced when it came to money. Think of it like this. The East was the rich side of the family. It had all the old established cities, the crazy profitable trade routes. They had enough cash to just pay off invaders or hire tons of mercenaries. But the West, it was the poorer Asin, always scraping by, constantly struggling just to pay for its own huge army. Problem number two, the army itself was changing in a big way. The West started relying heavily on Germanic recruits. I mean, get this, by the year 400, it's estimated that half the entire Western army was made up of these guys. Now, they were great fighters, for sure, but they often had zero interest in traditional Roman discipline, and, you guessed it, they had their own ambitions. And the third big issue was just pure geography. The West was stretched incredibly thin. It had to defend two massive, massive frontiers, the Rhine and the Danube rivers, and they were under constant pressure. The East, meanwhile, it had its own problems, yeah, but its borders were just way easier to defend. So you've got these three huge weaknesses, right? Money, the military, and geography. And the thing is, they weren't separate problems. They all fed into each other, creating this absolutely devastating, unstoppable downward spiral. And here's exactly how that vicious cycle worked. It kicks off with a crisis. Let's say a new tribe like the Visigoths crosses the border. Okay, so what does Rome do? It has to pull legions from another frontier to deal with them. But what does that do? Well, now that other frontier is wide open, basically an invitation for more tribes to just walk right in. This new problem stretches resources even thinner, tanks the local tax base, and boom, you've got a new crisis, and the whole thing starts all over again. And you can see this pattern playing out again and again and again. It's like a domino effect. In 378, a whole Roman army gets wiped out at Adrianople. So to handle the Visigoths, troops get moved, which eventually leads to the famous sack of Rome in 410. Then, to deal with that mess, they pull soldiers from other places, which lets the Vandals just take over North Africa. And why does that matter? Well, that was Rome's breadbasket. It crippled their food supply and led to another sack of Rome in 455. It was just a complete and total downward spiral. So what's the end result of this relentless cycle of chaos? By the middle of the 400s, the Western Empire was just spent. It was broken, the bank was empty, there weren't enough soldiers to go around, and its ability to even react to a crisis was gone. It had, without a doubt, hit the point of no return. But what happens next? When an empire this huge finally dissolves, does the idea of Rome just disappear with it? Poof? Gone overnight? Well, the official end date people always throw around is 476, when the last emperor in Italy was kicked out. But the last legally recognized emperor of the West, a guy named Julius Nepos, actually died in exile a few years later, in 480. See, there was no one big dramatic moment. It was more like a slow fade to black. But this is what's so incredible. Even after the Western government was gone, the idea of Rome was so powerful it just wouldn't die. I mean, the Eastern Roman Empire, the Byzantines, they kept going for another 1,000 years. The title of emperor was brought back in the West by Charlemagne. Heck, even Napoleon, centuries and centuries later, was still borrowing Roman-style titles and military eagles. The ghost of Rome was a hard one to shake. So, what do we take away from all this? I think the lesson from Rome is pretty powerful. A government, a state, can completely fall apart. But its culture, its laws, its legacy, that can cast a shadow that lasts for thousands of years. It really makes you think, doesn't it? How long can an empire's idea actually outlive its physical borders?